He doesn't see her as a woman. At first, he sees her as stolen bloodline. From a psychological standpoint, this is where the terror begins. Gabriel Rossi is not reacting like a father. He's reacting like a territorial apex predator whose legacy has been breached. His obsession with control, lineage, and possession reveals textbook grandiose narcissism shaped by violence and dynasty. Meanwhile, she is trapped in the most disturbing emotional paradox imaginable. The only man capable of protecting her unborn child is also the man who abducts her. What follows is not simple captivity, and it's trauma, dependency, and survival fused into one deeply toxic bond.
The story begins with the most elemental human impulse: the wish for a child, and the desire for an ordinary life. In a pristine clinic, a future was chosen from a screen, a sterile purchase designed for safety and discretion. Yet the life she bought was not from an anonymous donor. It was the seed of the East Coast's most feared man, a dealer in death. The moment the underworld learned she was carrying the heir to his violent empire, the peaceful blueprint of her existence was marked for ruin. She thought she had acquired a dream, but had instead launched a war, with ground zero at the Lane Institute of Family Planning in a gleaming Boston tower. The clinic was so discreet it never advertised. Access was granted only by referral. For Scarlett Hayes, an architectural conservator of 32, it took 6 months and a vast sum of her life savings to get an appointment. She now sat in the waiting room, twisting a silver ring, her unease a palpable thing. The room smelled of a strange marriage between costly floral arrangements and antiseptic, an aroma engineered to soothe the ultra-wealthy. Scarlett was not one of them. She was simply a woman whose biological clock was screaming its final alarm. After 2 broken engagements and a devastating diagnosis, she was here to claim her life. She had decided to have a child, entirely by her own will. A nurse in crisp white led her to Dr. Alistair Lane's opulent office. He was a man with silvered hair, the easy confidence of a politician, and the cold eyes of a hunter. He gestured to a seat before his monolithic desk. "Scarlett, wonderful! We're ready to proceed," Dr. Lane said, his finger gliding across a tablet. "Your blood panels are perfect. Hormone levels are ideal. We just have to finalize your choice." He handed her the device. Displayed on the screen was a numbered file. Profile 409, Italian-American, 6 feet 3 inches, profession listed as private equity. His health was perfect, with no genetic flags and a superior intellect. But crucially, there were no photos, a rule the Institute enforced to protect its high-profile clientele. Instead of a face, there was a short audio clip of a low, resonant voice reciting a meaningless poem, and then a list of attributes: dark hair, startlingly pale blue eyes, a powerful physique. "He's perfect," Scarlett breathed, her voice hushed. The profile seemed almost too good to be true. She asked for confirmation that he had surrendered all paternal rights, seeking absolute certainty that her child's world would be hers alone. Dr. Lane produced a practiced, reassuring smile. "Profile 409 is among our most private assets. The donor made this deposit years ago prior to a high-risk surgery. He has no interest in fatherhood. A formidable non-disclosure agreement binds him. He's a memory, Scarlett. Just the genetic material for the life you want to build," the doctor concluded. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Okay, let's do it. Let's have our baby." The procedure was done 2 weeks later. 4 weeks after that, Scarlett perched on the side of her tub, staring at a small plastic stick. 2 stark pink lines glared back at her. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down her face. She was pregnant. The next 4 months passed in a happy blur of vitamins, ultrasound scans, and painting the nursery of her Cambridge home a gentle, creamy yellow. At 18 weeks, she felt the first delicate flutters. A boy, it would be a son. She had never known a happiness so complete. She lived inside a flawless, peaceful bubble. She did not know, of course, that a bullet was about to burst it. You see, Gabriel Rossi did not deal in memories. He made ghosts. 30 miles from Scarlett's quiet sanctuary in the cavernous, dank basement of a waterfront warehouse, the air was thick with the scent of fear and spilled blood. Gabriel, the head of the Rossi family, casually flicked a single drop of blood from the sleeve of his Tom Ford suit. He was 34 with a chillingly calm presence, and he ruled the city's criminal landscape with an iron grip. A terrified, bloodied accountant was strapped to a chair before him. "I'm going to ask you only once more, Ree." Gabriel's voice was a low, controlled vibration. "What happened to my money?" The $3 million intended for laundering through his network of clinics had vanished. "Lane," the accountant choked out through a mouthful of blood. It was Dr. Lane. He had massive gambling debts. The Irish were on him. He siphoned the funds, Mr. Rossi. He drained the accounts to pay them off. Gabriel's pale blue eyes narrowed slightly. Dr. Augustus Lane. Gabriel was an investor at the Institute, using it as a sophisticated cover for his operations. But his ties to that clinic were also far more intimate. 5 years prior, before a surgery that almost crippled him, Gabriel had left genetic material in their storage. It was a contingency his father insisted upon to ensure the Rossi name would continue even if he died on the table. The surgery was a success, and Gabriel had long since forgotten the deposit even existed. "Silas," Gabriel said quietly to his second-in-command, a massive figure lurking nearby, "take care of Ree, and get the cars ready. We're going to pay a call on Dr. Lane." An hour later, the elegant glass entryway of the Lane Institute imploded. It was past midnight. The building was dark, but Gabriel and his 3 men disabled the security systems with savage efficiency. They discovered Dr. Lane in his office, desperately shoving stacks of cash into a leather satchel. Lane went rigid as the door clicked shut, revealing Gabriel holding a silenced Beretta that looked like a part of his own arm. "Leaving so soon, Alistair?" Gabriel asked, his tone dangerously light. "Gabriel, Mr. Rossi, I can explain the money. It's just a mix-up. I was going to pay back every last dollar." Gabriel raised a hand, cutting him off. "The money doesn't concern me, Alistair. $3 million is pocket change. What I demand is loyalty, and you have betrayed mine." He gave a short nod to Silas, who smashed Lane's face into the polished desktop. On the office computer, Silas accessed the clinic's protected database. "Pull the inventory," Gabriel instructed. "I want a full accounting of what this leech has been peddling." Silas's fingers blurred over the keys, shattering the encryption within seconds. Lists of client names and biological data filled the monitor. Then, abruptly, Silas froze. His entire form became completely still. "Boss," Silas said, his voice strained and unfamiliar, "you better look at this." Gabriel moved behind the desk. Displayed on the screen was the access history for Vault 7. Gabriel's own, highly secured vault. Asset profile 409. Status: liquidated. The date of the transaction was 5 months ago. The recipient was one Scarlett Hayes, a civilian with no known syndicate connections. An oppressive silence descended on the room, so thick it felt hard to breathe. Gabriel stared at the monitor, his pale eyes darkening like a gathering storm. The truth hit him with the force of a physical impact. His bloodline, the Rossi heir, had been stolen and sold. It was growing inside a complete stranger. Gabriel's hand lashed out, his fingers locking around Dr. Lane's throat with terrifying swiftness, hauling him up from the desk. "What have you done?" Gabriel snarled, his mask of control shattering to reveal the beast beneath. "I needed the cash," Lane rasped, his face turning a dark plum. "She was desperate. She paid $500,000 in cash for top-tier genetics. I fudged the files. I swear she has no idea who you are. She thinks you're an investment banker." "You sold my son," Gabriel said, the words tasting like acid. If his rivals, the Corsetti clan, found out about this, they would not wait. They would find the woman. They would kill her and his unborn child to erase his legacy. Gabriel dropped Lane, who felt the carpet, sucking in ragged breaths. Without a glance, Gabriel aimed the Beretta and pulled the trigger twice. The soft coughs from the silencer were the last sounds the doctor ever heard. "Wipe the servers, torch this entire place," Gabriel ordered Silas, his voice completely flat and devoid of any feeling. "And I want everything on Scarlet Hayes. Where she works, where she sleeps, the air she breathes. Find her before the sun comes up." The storm finally broke across Boston as Scarlet was locking her front door. Rain lashed the streets, whipped by a savage wind. She was precisely 22 weeks along. She rested a hand on the gentle swell of her belly, feeling a faint, reassuring flutter. "I know, my little one," she murmured with a smile. "Mommy is on her way to get the ice cream right now. It's a promise." Scarlet opened her umbrella and ventured out for a quick walk to a neighborhood shop. But the streetlights were flickering, bathing the block in a strange, theatrical glow. Her street, typically bustling with late-night academics, was unnervingly silent. As she rounded the corner to Elm Street, a blacked-out SUV sat idling, its engine a deep rumble beneath the storm. A sudden, primal fear shot through Scarlet, a coldness that had nothing to do with the rain. Her long-dormant survival instinct, unneeded in her safe world, screamed to life. She began to walk faster. It was the wrong choice. The SUV's doors swung open as one. 3 suited men emerged into the downpour, forming a wall that blocked her way. Scarlet stopped dead, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Her grip tightened on the umbrella as she recoiled a single step. "Pardon me," she managed, her voice a tremor she couldn't suppress. "You're in my way." The figures were stone. Then the car's back door unlatched, revealing the scene's master. The storm itself seemed to bend around him. He was a silhouette of power, his wide frame draped in a dark coat over expensive tailoring. As he passed under a faltering street lamp, his features were cast in light. A chiseled jaw, rain-slicked hair, and eyes of an impossible, piercing azure. The clinic's recording exploded in her mind, a fact that could not exist. The donor was meant to be an echo. He was supposed to be an abstraction, a specter haunting the careful architecture of her future. Scarlet Hayes. The sound was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. It was the voice from the recording, the one that had once spun poems of the sea inside her thoughts. Now all its heat was gone, replaced by a cold, absolute command. "Who are you?" she challenged, her hands flying to shield her belly as she looked away. "How do you know who I am?" Gabriel strode closer. A predator's gaze swept over her, the drenched coat, the naked fear in her eyes, and then locked onto the curve of her abdomen. His. A fierce, possessive instinct roared to life within him. "I am Gabriel Rossi," he stated, stopping exactly 2 feet away. Even the downpour appeared to shy away from him. "And you," he went on, are carrying what is mine. Breath caught in Scarlett's lungs. Rossi, the name struck her like a physical blow. In this city, Rossi was synonymous with control. Over the waterfront, the labor guilds, the very pulse of politics, they were the mafia, pure and simple. No, she breathed, a denial whispered on instinct as she backed away. The umbrella fell from her fingers, its clatter loud on the wet ground. No, it's a mistake. I went to a clinic. An anonymous donor was compensated. The file said... The file was a lie, Gabriel cut in, his voice a blade of silk. Dr. Lane cleared his debts with what wasn't his to sell. He sold you my bloodline. Your perfect dream was built by a petty criminal. And this evening, he paid for it with his life. His meaning slammed into her, brutal as a fist, paid with his life. Primal fear swallowed every rational thought. Scarlett turned and fled, a desperate sprint into the heart of the storm. The slick pavement meant nothing. Only escape mattered. She didn't make it 15 feet. A blur of motion and strong arms wrapped around her middle, carefully avoiding the swell of her stomach, hoisting her off the ground like a doll. A raw scream ripped from her throat as she thrashed. A wild thing caught in a trap, her fists beating against solid muscle. "Let me go! Somebody help!" she shrieked, kicking uselessly. Gabriel pinned her arms with a grip of iron, yet his hold was meticulously gentle around their child. "Stop fighting, Scarlett. If I meant you harm, you'd already be gone." He carried her to the vehicle and placed her inside the plush leather interior. He slid in after her. The heavy door's closure was a final, sound-dampening thud that cut off the storm and her screams. Up front, a man named Silas locked the doors and the SUV surged from the curb with cold precision. Scarlett retreated to the far side, her breathing hitched and broken, tears and rain mixing on her cheeks. "What will happen to us?" she wept, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly. "I swear I didn't know. Take the money. I'll vanish. I'll sign anything. Just let me have my child." Gabriel shed his wet coat, his face unreadable as he watched her come apart. A civilian caught in a war she didn't know was being fought. "You don't understand the situation you are now in," Gabriel stated, his calm voice laced with menace. "In my life, blood is wealth. Blood is strength, and blood is always a liability. The instant the Corsettis find out a Rossi heir is carried by an unprotected woman, they will send men to carve that baby out of you." A strangled sob broke from Scarlett as she covered her face. It was a waking nightmare, a hell she couldn't escape. "You wanted a donor, Miss Hayes," Gabriel continued, his presence filling the space between them. The scent of rain and costly cologne grew stronger. "You chose a monarch instead, and my heirs are not brought up in unsecured walk-up flats." "Then what's your game?" she shot back, terror and rebellion warring in her eyes. "Lock me up and take my baby when it's born." "My game," Gabriel amended, "is keeping you alive. From right now you don't exist. Your home will be emptied. Your job will get a notice of your immediate transfer overseas. You are now the property of the Rossi family." "You can't do this. It's abduction." "It's protection," Gabriel countered, his tone glacial as he watched the blurred city lights pass by the dark glass. "Welcome to the family, Scarlett." The vehicle cut through the darkness, aimed for the reinforced gates of the Rossi estate. A shiver racked Scarlett's body, her hand shielding her stomach in the car's heated cabin. She'd spent everything she had to build a quiet, ordered life. Instead, she'd bought herself a beautiful prison, locked by the monster who was her child's father. She woke to the smell of coffee and a deep, unnerving quiet in a room far too large. Morning sun poured through massive panes of glass, forcing her to squint. For a single blessed moment, her memory was blank. Then the full horror of last night came crashing down. This wasn't her apartment. It was a cavernous suite, something from a feature on contemporary fortresses. The room was walled in rich, somber walnut. The sheets felt impossibly fine, and the door was locked from the outside. Scarlett sat up, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "We're okay," she murmured to her baby, a slight tremor in her tone. "We're still safe." On the beside table sat a silver tray with hot decaf, a dish of sliced fruit, and, with unnerving familiarity, the exact prenatal vitamins she used. Next to them was the lotion from her vanity. Her sanctuary had been completely invaded. They had boxed up her life while she was unconscious. A soft click announced the heavy door swinging open, revealing Gabriel Rossi in an impeccable charcoal three-piece suit, sans tie. He looked less like a thug and more like a ruthless corporate raider, which he was in his own way. "Morning," Gabriel's baritone filled the vast space. He didn't ask how she slept. He just walked to the window, took a seat in a leather chair, and watched her with those cold, azure eyes. "You can't keep me," Scarlett stated, pulling the sheet up to her neck, faking a courage she did not possess. "I have a job, a life, doctor's visits, people will notice I'm gone." "Your office got an email from you at 6 a.m., Gabriel answered coolly, settling one leg over the other. "You took a well-paid, urgent job restoring a chateau in Switzerland. Your lease is broken, the penalty paid. Your things are in storage, rented by me. For your health, Dr. Harrison, one of the best OBs in the state, is setting up a private clinic for you on the ground floor. You will want for nothing." Scarlett just stared, appalled at the surgical precision he'd used to excise her from the world. "You erased me overnight." "I protected you," Gabriel countered, his jaw tight. "You think you're a prisoner? You're wrong. You are carrying the next Rossi. Outside these walls, you're a target. Inside, with 50 guards and steel fences, you are royalty." "I don't want to be royalty," she shot back, frustration bringing hot tears to her eyes. "I just wanted a baby. I bought a specimen from a clinic. I did not sign up for the mob." Gabriel stood and crossed the room in 3 deliberate steps. He stopped beside the bed, a towering figure eclipsing the morning light. The air smelled of citrus and unspoken violence. "You didn't buy a specimen, you bought my bloodline," Gabriel hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "And that bloodline is not just yours. The Corsettis have tried to wipe my family out for 3 generations. If Dominic Corsetti learns you exist, your naivete won't save you." Gabriel then presents a horrifying bargain. Corsetti would have the child carved from her body to make a point. Her existence is now brutally simple. She will stay. She will consume his meals, be tended by his doctors, and her only purpose is to endure. The weight of his decree finally pulverizes her denial. She searches his eyes and finds nothing but a stark, merciless truth. "I understand," she forces out. "Good," he answers, his stoic expression snapping back into place. He summons a maid, Clara, and arranges a physician's visit. And so for the next 3 weeks, Scarlett was an inmate in a gilded cage. She was granted leave to wander the sprawling grounds, though always trailed by a heavily armed sentinel named Matteo, who kept a strict 20-pace distance. A private chef was hers, as was a personal pool and a library filled with rare volumes Gabriel had acquired for her. He handled her like a priceless, volatile investment, making inquiries twice daily with clinical questions about the fetus's condition. There was no humanity in it. She was simply the incubator for his lineage. But Scarlett is an architect. She is trained to see structure and to find the fractures within. She studied the staff, cataloged the guard shifts, and built a mental blueprint of the estate. And she fixed her focus on Clara, the maid who was a portrait of raw nerves. The maid never met the guard's eyes, her forehead perpetually slick with sweat, even in the estate's chill. One afternoon, reclining in her suite, Scarlett's fingers grazed a rigid object tucked deep beneath her pillow. It was a cheap, disposable cell phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She shot a look toward the bathroom, where Clara was preparing her bath. The rush of the faucet, a welcome veil of sound. Scarlett thumped the device on. A lone message blinked. "We know he holds you. We can get you out. Southgate, 2 a.m. tonight. D.C." The air vanished from Scarlett's lungs. D.C. Dominic Corsetti, the opposing king. Scarlett sat frozen, the flimsy plastic of the phone feeling like a live wire in her palm. The offer was a mirage of freedom, an exit, a way to simply vanish. For a beat, she let herself imagine it, sprinting toward the promise of night. But then Gabriel's unblinking certainty flooded her mind. He will carve that child out of you. Why would his sworn rival offer her safe passage? He wouldn't. He would cripple Gabriel by erasing his heir before it could be born. This wasn't a rescue operation, it was an invitation to a double execution for herself and her unborn son. Scarlett got to her feet. She dismisses the thought of a hurried bag, of a secret 2 a.m. flight. A wall of practiced calm within her shatters, and she storms from her suite, deaf to a maid's startled gasp, moving down the grand staircase like an avenging fury. Matteo emerges from the shadows of the architecture, a human roadblock. "Miss Hayes, you should be resting." Her response cuts through the quiet, "Get me to Gabriel, now." Stunned but obedient, Matteo leads her deep into the West Wing, toward Gabriel's study. After one sharp rap on the door, it swings open to reveal Gabriel and Silas poring over schematics, their heads jerking up at the breach of protocol. Gabriel's focus instantly drops to her belly, a reflexive check for damage before locking with her eyes. "What is it?" he demands, his voice a blade. Scarlett marches forward, slamming a burner phone down on his polished desk. "Your security is a myth," she announces, her words hanging in the abrupt silence. "Clara gave me this. DC says he can pull me out via the south gate tonight." The temperature in the room plummets. Silas breathes a curse, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm, but Gabriel halts him with a raised hand. His attention remains fixed solely on Scarlett, not the phone. The cold armor in his eyes cracks, showing a flicker of astonishment and a strange glimmer of respect. "You had a choice," Gabriel notes, his voice a low rumble. "You could have run. You loathe this prison." "I loathe being a pawn," Scarlett shoots back, her hand instinctively cupping her abdomen. "But I'm not an idiot, Gabriel. I know Corsetti's goal isn't to save me, but to eliminate my child. And whatever monster you are to the rest of the world, you are the only one with a stake in this baby's survival." Gabriel moves around the desk, stopping just inches from her, stealing the air from her lungs. His hand hovers over the phone for a predatory moment before he snatches it. He crushes the cheap plastic, the snap echoing in the strained silence. "Silas," Gabriel orders, his eyes still locked on Scarlett's. "Find Clara." I want to know everything she told them before you break her fingers, then put this estate on lockdown. Nobody in, nobody out. On it, boss, Silas replies, leaving with grim efficiency. Gabriel turns back to Scarlet, who is now shaking as the adrenaline ebbs. Without a word, a hand on the small of her back, a touch of disarming gentleness steers her to a sofa. Sit, he commands softly. You're shaking. Is it time? She asks, sinking into the cushions. Corsetti is a man without patience, Gabriel states, retrieving a heavy black Sig Sauer from a hidden panel, cycling the action with practiced ease. If he planned for 2 a.m., his team is already in position. Your failure to appear will be their signal to attack. As if his words were a summons, a deep, muffled boom rattles the bulletproof windows. The overhead chandelier sways violently. A piercing alarm begins to shriek, flooding the compound with its urgent cry. The lights cut out, replaced in a heartbeat by an eerie crimson emergency glow. The South Gate, Gabriel growls. What follows is the sound of total bedlam, the brutal staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire erupting from the grounds. Scarlet gasps, her hand covering her mouth as the abstract danger becomes terrifyingly real. The script of a violent thriller was playing out on her lawn. In a flash, Gabriel is across the room, his hand closing around her arm, hauling her up from the sofa. We're going to the panic room now. He pulls her into a corridor, now choked with disciplined chaos, as his men rush past, barking orders into air growing thick with the haze of cordite. They hit the main foyer, just as the massive front doors shudder from a heavy impact. Move, Gabriel barks, shoving Scarlet behind him as he brings his pistol up. They sprint to a hidden doorway behind a medieval tapestry. He taps in a code. A thick steel slab slides open. He pushes her inside just as the mansion's main doors splinter into 1,000 pieces. Gabriel fires 3 precise shots into the breach, dropping a masked intruder before spinning into the safe room and hitting the lock. The door seals with a deafening finality, casting them into darkness before the bunker's independent power kicks in. The room is a compact concrete box packed with survival gear. After the firefight, the sudden oppressive silence is a shock. Scarlet sinks down the cool wall, pulling her knees to her chest in a primal gesture of self-defense. Gabriel is already at a bank of monitors, his eyes scanning feeds of the battle raging on his property. He is a general watching the board, his face a mask of cold fury. Suddenly, Scarlet lets out a sharp, pained gasp, her hands flying to her abdomen. She clutches herself, her eyes wide with fear. Gabriel! He pivots, the gun in his hand forgotten, and is on his knees before her in an instant. Are you hit? Do you see blood? No, she pants, her eyes screwed shut. It's not. It's the baby. Gabriel's hands pause over her, helpless, a rare look of stark terror flashing across his face. With impossible gentleness, he lays his large, warm hand flat against her stomach. Beneath his palm, through the thin material of her dress, a solid, definitive kick pushes back and then another. Gabriel goes utterly still. The sounds of the war raging above them simply cease to register. He stares at her belly, his blue eyes wide with shock, completely undone by the life announcing its presence against his skin. This is the first time he has felt his child, not as a concept or an air, but as a living, breathing part of him. He lifts his head, his gaze finding Scarlet's, which are brimming with tears. In the faint, crimson light, the lines between the ruthless crime lord and the captive mother blur into nothing. leaving only two people bound by a shared terror of losing the only thing that now mattered. For one suspended second inside that concrete tomb, the battle outside became meaningless. Gabriel Rossi, a man whose life was a series of cold, hard calculations, was utterly incapacitated. His hand stayed pressed to Scarlett's stomach, his entire being focused on the point where his unborn son had just made his presence known. Another small push met his palm. It was a silent act of defiance against the chaos trying to consume them. He pulled his hand away, looking at his own palm as if it had betrayed him. In that moment, the ironclad composure of the Rossi patriarch began to splinter, revealing the man inside. He looked at Scarlett, a trembling shape against the cold wall, trying to make herself small. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice a thread of sound over the bunker's low hum. "I felt it," Gabriel confirmed, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't identify. "This was never about a contract. It's about a life. His life." He stood, the weapon on his hip forgotten, his entire bearing shifting from that of a captor to that of a protector. "You're safe, Scarlett. I am betting my life on it. You are safe." Before the words could settle, a heavy impact shuddered through the bunker's colossal steel door. The tactical radio on Gabriel's hip hissed to life. "Boss," Silas's voice, frayed but controlled, cut through the quiet. "Hostiles are down or gone. We lost 4. Perimeter's locked, but the main house is a total loss." The warmth in Gabriel's face vanished, replaced by the cold granite of command. "Copy. Get the cars ready. We're moving." He offered a hand down to Scarlett. She stared at it, broad, scarred, a weapon in itself, and for the first time saw not a monster, but her only way out. She took his hand, and he lifted her to her feet with a grip that was surprisingly gentle, aware of her fragility. Gabriel tapped in the code, and the massive door slid open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing absolute carnage in the main hall. Scarlett gasped, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. The rich walnut walls were shredded by gunfire. The ancient tapestry that had hidden the entrance now lay in a smoldering heap. Under the pulsing red emergency lights, shattered glass from the front windows crunched like broken ice. The air was a thick cocktail of cordite and blood. 2 of his men were dragging a body in tactical armor from the ruined entryway. "Don't look," Gabriel murmured, stepping to shield her view of a blood pool spreading from the staircase. He used his own body as a bulwark, steering her through the wreckage. Outside, the storm had broken, leaving behind a cold, wet chill. A convoy of 3 armored black Maybachs sat idling in the drive, headlights slicing through the gloom. Matteo stood by the middle car, an M4 carbine held across his chest. He swung the heavy door open as they approached. Gabriel helped Scarlett into the supple leather seat, then slid in beside her. Silas took the front. "Where are we going?" Scarlett's voice trembled as the convoy peeled away from the smoldering estate. "The Seaport District," Gabriel replied, his eyes in constant motion scanning the dark. "I have a secured penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton. It's a ghost property, buried under 3 layers of trusts. The security is military grade. Its private elevator is sealed without my direct command." "And Clara?" Scarlett asked, her mind flashing to the terrified maid who had set the night in motion. Silas twisted the passenger seat. "She's gone, Miss Hayes. She panicked at the first shots and made a run for a side exit. Ran straight into Corsetti's breach team." They had sacrificed their own asset without a thought. Nausea twisted in Scarlett's gut. A woman dead. Men dead. All of this, spawned from a procedure in a sterile room. The weight of the violence felt suffocating. Gabriel saw the color drain from her face. He pulled a water bottle from a cooler, uncapped it, and pressed it into her hand. "Drink," he ordered softly. "She was just a maid," Scarlett whispered, a tear breaking free. She was terrified. "She was a risk," Gabriel corrected, though the usual harshness was gone from his voice. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "But she was also a sign of a much deeper problem." Corsetti's men had navigated the estate's defenses with surgical accuracy. They knew the patrol routes, the exact layout of his sanctuary. Clara was just a pawn, incapable of possessing that level of intel. "What are you trying to say?" Scarlett's question was a tremor, her hand unsteady as she raised the water. "This betrayal comes from much higher up than a housekeeper," Gabriel said, his gaze sharpening in the SUV's deep shadows. "And someone's been planning this for a very long time. An op this clean requires months of surveillance on my home." A cold dread began to creep into Scarlett's blood as a terrible possibility started to form. She watched his face, lit, and then darkened by the passing Boston skyline. "Gabriel," she started, her voice a thin, fragile sound. "Right before the clinic, a private equity group bought my architecture firm. They moved my office, gave us new security, new phones, new laptops. All of it happened at the exact same time I began my IVF treatments." Gabriel's entire body went rigid. The silence in the armored car became dense and suffocating. From his seat, Silas turned, his face a grim mirror of his boss's dawning horror. "What was the name of the group?" Gabriel's voice was unnervingly quiet, devoid of all emotion. "Apex Holdings," Scarlett answered, the name pounding like a drum in her chest. Gabriel took out a slim, encrypted smartphone. "Silas, I need a deep file on Apex Holdings. Run their board against every Corsetti shell company from the last 5 years." The rest of the drive passed in a strained, unbearable quiet. The city lights smeared into an abstract blur as they descended into the Ritz-Carlton's subterranean garage. The move from the vehicle to a private elevator was a silent, perfect maneuver by Gabriel's team. As the lift ascended, Gabriel's eyes finally met hers. The cold, impenetrable mob boss was gone, replaced by a man just beginning to grasp the true depth of the treachery aimed at his lineage. "If Apex is a Corsetti company," Gabriel said softly, his words landing with the elevator's chime, "then them finding you was never an accident, Scarlett. They have been watching you since the very beginning." The Ritz-Carlton penthouse was the polar opposite of the Rossi Estate's Gothic gloom. It was a sprawling, modern gallery of glass, steel, and white marble that commanded a full 360-degree view of Boston Harbor. But for all its clean beauty, the reinforced doors and armed guards at every entry confirmed that Scarlett had only been transferred from one luxurious prison to another. As the sun rose, painting the harbor in shades of purple and gold, Dr. Harrison was already there. Escorted by guards, the physician quickly assembled a mobile medical unit in the massive master suite. Scarlett lay on the bed, her hands twisting in the sheets as Dr. Harrison moved the cold wand of a fetal Doppler across her belly. Gabriel stood guard at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. He hadn't slept, and the dark stubble on his jaw gave him an even more intimidating presence. Suddenly, a fast, rhythmic rushing filled the room, the sound of a strong, healthy heartbeat. A choked sob escaped Scarlett's lips as her eyes fluttered shut in a wave of overwhelming relief. Tears cut trails from her eyes into her hair. He was alive, he was safe. Fetal heart rate is a stable 145 beats per minute, Dr. Harrison said with a warm smile, offering a tissue. No distress, no premature contractions. The baby came through the ordeal beautifully. You, Miss Hayes, are showing elevated blood pressure. I'm ordering strict bed rest for the next 48 hours. Gabriel gave the doctor a sharp, final nod. Mateo will escort you out. The equipment stays. When they were alone, Gabriel walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his stare fixed on the city awakening below. The tension radiating from him was a tangible force in the room. Scarlett sat up, clutching her silk robe tighter. The night's attack had fundamentally changed the space between them. Their animosity had been cauterized by a shared animal instinct to survive. Did Silas find anything on Apex Holdings? Scarlett's question softly broke the silence. Gabriel kept his back to her, facing the harbor. He confirmed our worst fear. Apex Holdings is a front. The money vanishes 3 companies deep, ending at a wealth management firm in Zurich, a firm owned by Dominic Corsetti. Scarlett felt the air punch out of her lungs. They had owned her work, her life. They controlled every part of your world, Scarlett, Gabriel finally said, turning to face her with eyes like a coming storm. They ran your building's security. They read your work emails, listened to your calls. The instant you searched for a fertility clinic, they knew. Defying the doctor's direct order, Scarlett swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her mind, designed for blueprints and load-bearing walls, was now constructing a horrifying new architecture of conspiracy. She rose, crossing the heated marble floor to him. "Wait," she whispered, her brow creased with focus. "You told me Dr. Lane sold my embryo to pay an Irish mob debt." That was the story Reese built from the ledgers, Gabriel confirmed, his jaw tight. The accountant saw the paper trail. But Reese only saw the story Lane wanted him to see, Scarlett countered, the conclusion hitting her with the force of a blow. She grabbed Gabriel's arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket. "Think about it, Gabriel. If Corsetti owned my firm, if he was watching my every move, what are the chances that I would just randomly pick the one clinic that had the Rossi sample where a doctor would somehow make that exact impossible mistake?" Gabriel's eyes widened as the chilling, insane logic of her words began to lock into place. "Are you saying this wasn't an accident?" "I'm saying I was targeted," Scarlett breathed, a chill tracing her spine. "I'm 32, no partner, no close family. I live by myself in a small townhouse with minimal security. I was the perfect, unprotected mark." She moved to the glass desk holding a dossier of the clinic's hacked financials. She rifled through the documents until she found the master ledger, a finger dragging down the rows. "Look," she insisted, waving Gabriel closer. He leaned forward, his chest brushing her spine, sending a shock through her she fought to conceal. "These transfers," Scarlett began, tapping a series of large payments to Dr. Lane's foreign accounts. $3 million, sent 6 months ago, right after my first appointment. But look at the routing codes. This isn't from the Irish syndicate. They use specific crypto tumblers out of Dublin." Gabriel saw the alphanumeric string, his mind recognizing the financial signature. The Caymans. That prefix is from a bank used solely by the Corsetti family. "Lane didn't sell your legacy for a gambling problem," Scarlett uttered, her voice a horrified whisper. "Corsetti paid him for it." "Corsetti gave Dr. Lane $3 million to steal your secured file." implant it in a completely exposed civilian, and then set her loose. A heavy silence descended on the penthouse, thick with the audacity of the scheme. Dominic Corsetti didn't just want the Rossi line ended. He had created a personal spectacle for Gabriel. He needed the child born utterly defenseless, cut off from any Rossi protection, allowing Corsetti to kill them both with ease. The final demonstration of his power. Gabriel's hands seized the desk, his knuckles bleached white. A guttural sound vibrated in his chest, the noise of absolute murderous fury. He had been thoroughly outmaneuvered, with Scarlet as a pawn in a war she never knew was being fought. "You were the bait," Gabriel bit out, the words tasting of poison. He saw Scarlet's pale face, her terror-filled gaze, and the automatic way she covered her abdomen. She hadn't acquired a genetic sample. She'd been led into a psychopath's perfectly laid snare. "He used me to carry your son just so he could execute him to ruin you," Scarlet sobbed, her composure finally shattering. She staggered back from the desk, her breaths coming in short, painful gasps. I was an incubator for his vengeance." In a movement so fast it startled her, Gabriel crossed the space, gathering her into his arms. It wasn't a gentle hold, but a raw, claiming instinct. He surrounded her, his face buried in her hair as her cries broke against him. He held her firm, a human bulwark against her rising panic. "You are not an incubator," Gabriel growled into her ear. "You are the mother of my son, and Scarlet, you have my word. By the end of this week, Dominic Corsetti is going to choke on his own blood." For the first time, Scarlet wrapped her arms around Gabriel, holding on to him. In this brutal, frightening new world, the ruthless mob boss was her only safe harbor. Suddenly, the piercing ring of a phone shattered the stillness. It wasn't one of Gabriel's burner phones. It was the heavy, encrypted satellite phone Silas had left, the line for syndicate emergencies only. Gabriel pulled back from Scarlet, his face becoming an unreadable mask. He walked to the desk and glanced at the glowing screen. There was no caller identification, just a string of zeros. He put the call on speaker, and the air in the room grew thick with menace. "Rossi," Gabriel said, his voice deadly calm. The sharp sound of a lighter, then the slow exhale of a cigar, came through the line. "Gabriel," a sleek, cold voice replied. "I hear you've moved the woman to the Ritz. An elegant choice, much better than that old fortress of yours." Scarlet's blood ran cold. It was him, Dominic Corsetti. "You broke the code, Dominic," Gabriel stated, his free hand clenching so hard that his nails dug into his skin. "You involved blood. The commission will not approve this." Dominic chuckled. The threat was delivered with a cold, hollow tone. "The commission, Gabriel, deals in evidence, not rumors. On public record, Miss Hayes will be just another sad statistic from a home invasion. A real shame, people will say. Especially tragic, since she won't make it to her 3rd trimester." Gabriel's eyes locked on Scarlet, a lethal promise within them. "Touch her, Dominic, and your death will be a mercy. I will salt the earth where your family once stood." "A brave speech for a king in a glass tower," Dominic taunted. "Enjoy the view, Gabriel." The ultimatum was laid bare. You have 48 hours to hand over the port territories. If you fail, the architect's head will be sent by courier. The line went dead. The words left a poisonous film in the air, a guarantee of total destruction. This was no longer a hidden war. The fight had come inside their sanctuary, with nowhere left to run. Putting the phone down, Gabriel looked at Scarlet with terrifying resolve. The time for defense had passed. Now they would hunt. Dominic Corsetti's ultimatum fouled the air. 48 hours, 2 days until his world descended to tear theirs apart. Standing at the desk, Gabriel was already lost in the cold calculus of war. "Silas," he commanded, his voice like ice. "I want every soldier armed and moving. Activate all assets at the docks. We will shatter their supply lines. We will hit their safe houses. We will scour them from Boston before dawn." "Gabriel, wait!" Scarlett's voice cut through his rising battle fever. She was by the window watching the city's glowing veins. "A street war is a slow bleed, a fight you can't win. You don't have the time." "We don't have the time." Her hand came to rest on her stomach. "Your only goal tonight is to cut the head from the snake." "Dominic is untouchable," Gabriel argued, facing her. "He runs everything from the top of the Apex Tower. The building is a fortress. Biometric scanners, reinforced walls, and a private army of former special forces. A direct attack is suicide." "Not if you know the building's hidden flaws," Scarlett countered, a sharp intelligence burning in her gaze. She walked by him, taking a silver laptop from a bag Clara had packed. "Before Apex moved me to the front desk, I was their head preservationist for portfolio work. My firm oversaw the Apex Tower's structural renovation." A look of stunned disbelief passed between Gabriel and Silas. Gabriel stood behind her as she opened the laptop, her fingers flying over security measures she had likely put in place herself. "For the public valuation, Apex hired a major firm, but they contracted us to assess the tower's foundational integrity," she explained, bringing up a detailed 3D model of the skyscraper. "Dominic thinks he's a god in his castle in the sky." So, the pretender Dominic covers a 1930s structure with new technology and bulletproof glass, thinking he's safe. But he never considered Scarlett. She points out the fatal flaw. To support his penthouse, they sank new columns. In the process, his team capped, but never filled, old Prohibition-era service shafts. The word capped clicks for Gabriel as realization dawns. Scarlett confirms it. A 3-foot-wide tunnel runs from the subway, ending just inside the drywall of Dominic's most private office. The builders, she noted, used sheet metal instead of reinforced concrete, a money-saving decision that would now be their downfall. A predatory smile crossed Gabriel's face. It was a direct path to the enemy's heart. His eyes fell on Scarlett, the woman carrying his child who had just handed him his victory. He was floored, whispering that she was incredible. He turned to his man. "Silas, get the gear. We're going now." 3 hours later, they moved through filthy sewer tunnels. Gabriel, in black tactical gear with a submachine gun across his chest. Silas and 6 of his most trusted killers flanked him. They found the ventilation shaft exactly where Scarlett's plans showed it, sealed by a welded grate. Silas used a thermal charge, and the metal dissolved with a low hiss. The climb was a brutal 400-foot ascent through a vertical black passage. Yet Gabriel was driven by a cold fury. He saw Scarlett in the safe room, their unborn son used as leverage. Dominic Corsetti had made this fight for survival. The war would be settled tonight. At the top of the shaft, they stopped behind the thin, sheet metal wall separating them from their target. Gabriel could hear voices. He gave a hand signal, and his team moved into position. Silas planted a breaching charge. Gabriel's countdown was silent. 3, 2, 1. The explosion was a contained blast, ripping the metal and a chunk of wall inward in a spray of shrapnel. Gabriel stepped through the smoke, a specter of vengeance. Dominic's security, watching the normal entrances, was completely unprepared for an assault from inside the room. Gabriel's team moved with surgical precision, the whisper of silenced weapons the only sound as men crumpled to the floor. In the aftermath, only Dominic Corsetti remained. Trapped behind his desk, a golden revolver shook in his hand, his gaze fixed on the raw cavity torn in his fortress wall. "How?" he choked out, a guard's blood spattering his tie. "Impossible." Gabriel advanced, weapon down, his stare a promise of the end. "You bought the building, Dominic, but you never learned its secrets." Dominic's pistol wavered. "I'll kill you, Rossi, you, the architect, and the mutt in her belly." Gabriel didn't react. In a blur of motion, he seized Dominic's wrist, and a sharp crack echoed as bone snapped. The gilded gun tumbled onto the rug. A knee to the gut stole Dominic's scream, folding him to the floor as Gabriel loomed over him, his own Sig Sauer now aimed at Dominic's temple. "This was your mistake," he said. His voice was a low, threatening hum. "You thought my bloodline was a weakness? You saw her as nothing but a womb." The click of the hammer was the only answer in the blood-soaked room. "She is the future of my house. Your story is already over." A single shot ended it. Later, as rain wept down the penthouse glass, Scarlett waited. Wrapped in a blanket, sleep was a distant memory. When the door finally opened, her heart seized. He emerged from the dark, stripped of his gear, his shirt a canvas of ash and red. He was a portrait of savage triumph, etched with fatigue. Without a word, he crossed to the bathroom, unleashing the shower at full force. Scarlett dropped the blanket and followed him to the threshold. She watched as he ripped the soiled fabric away, bearing a torso mapped by a violent history. He leaned into the steaming deluge, bracing against the wall as if to scour his enemy's life from his skin. She entered with a fresh towel and stood a silent vigil. When the water stopped, the Don's hardened mask was gone. His eyes met hers, raw with an exhaustion that went to the bone. "It's over," Gabriel breathed. "Corsetti is gone. His men are surrendering the docks to Silas. The danger has passed, Scarlett. You're safe. The child is safe." A choked sob broke from her. She draped the towel over his shoulders, her arms locking around him. Burying her face in his chest, she inhaled the scent of the man who had burned down a rival for her. His arms became an anchor, his lips finding her hair. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered against his skin. "I will always come back to you," Gabriel vowed, tilting her face toward his. "You're my family now, Scarlett. You and our child. No one gets near you again." 4 months later, the maternity wing was a fortress. Guards in sharp suits stood watch, their presence an unspoken warning. But inside the sunlit delivery room, that violent world felt like a distant myth. Scarlett, spent but luminous, smiled from her bed. Gabriel kept his vigil in a chair pulled close beside her. The feared leader, the Rossi Syndicate, a man forged in violence, was crying openly. In his arms, he cradled a tiny blanketed bundle, a son with a tuft of black hair, and Gabriel knew his own pale blue eyes. "He's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with awe as he gently stroked the infant's cheek. "Absolutely perfect." "He has your scowl," Scarlett teased, her hand covering his. Gabriel looked at her. In the last 4 months, the cage was gone, replaced by a throne they shared. He'd been there for every doctor's visit, read every book, and let her breach his defenses one by one. She was no longer his captive, but his queen. "What's his name?" he murmured, kissing her forehead. Scarlet looked at the man who had bought her, battled for her, and somehow earned her loyalty. "Leo," she answered softly. "Leo Rossi. It means lion." A true, unguarded smile transformed Gabriel's face. "Leo, the heir." He spoke to his son. "One day, you'll own this world, little lion. But for now, sleep." Scarlet relaxed as Gabriel placed their son in her arms. 9 months before, she had walked into a clinic wanting a quiet life and a child. She had acquired a crime lord, an empire, and a legacy of blood. But as Gabriel's arms created a fortress around them, a shield from the world, she knew she wouldn't trade this dangerous, broken family for anything. Scarlet Hayes had tried to purchase a baby at the Lane Institute. With a checkbook and a hope, she had instead bought an entire criminal dynasty and ignited a war. From a storm of betrayal and violence, an improbable alliance was born. Gabriel Rossi, a creature of pure brutality, was captivated by the very woman sent to engineer his destruction, a perfect paradox. Their bond was never romance. It was a pact signed with the blood of mutual survival. The gilded prison that once held Scarlet was shattered and rebuilt as a bastion of savage loyalty. In its walls, she found the family she had craved, a clan more fiercely protective and beautifully unhinged than she could ever have imagined.
From a clinical perspective, the story is a rich case study in coercion, attachment, and survival cognition. Gabriel presents the behavioral profile of a highly controlled, high-functioning, organized crime leader with strong narcissistic structuring. He is possessive, dominance-oriented, and deeply invested in legacy. However, unlike the cartoon psychopath archetype, he is not emotionally empty. His emotional life is compartmentalized. That distinction is critical. He does not lack attachment. He has merely fused attachment with control. Scarlet, meanwhile, enters the story as a civilian under acute traumatic destabilization. Her autonomy is erased almost overnight. Home, employment, medical care, movement, and identity are all reorganized by an outside authority. Under normal psychological conditions, this would create severe disorientation, dependency pressure, and compliance adaptation. Many viewers would simplistically label her later reliance on Gabriel as weakness. Clinically, that would be inaccurate. Why? Because the human nervous system prioritizes survival over ideological consistency. Once a person recognizes that the environment contains multiple threats, the mind begins ranking danger rather than rejecting all danger equally. Gabriel is her captor, yes, but Corsetti is annihilative. That distinction changes her psychological calculus. She does not bond with Gabriel because captivity is romantic. She bonds because he becomes the most reliable barrier between her and extermination. This is where the life lesson deepens. People in traumatic environments often mistake adaptation for moral failure. In reality, adaptation is frequently the nervous system's most intelligent response. Scarlet's turning point is not surrender. It is discernment. She identifies the fake rescue, predicts predatory intent, and chooses the option most likely to preserve life. That is not passivity. That is high-level situational cognition under stress. Gabriel also undergoes a notable shift. Prior to the child becoming psychologically real to him, he frames Scarlet primarily as a protected asset. After contact with the unborn child, his language and posture change. The object becomes relational. In psychiatric terms, abstraction gives way to embodiment. Once a person stops being symbolic and becomes emotionally specific, cruelty becomes harder to maintain without fracture. The lesson here is stark but useful. Trauma distorts perception, but it can also sharpen it. Survival does not always look noble. Sometimes it looks like alliance with an imperfect protector, emotional dependence under duress, or attachment formed in morally compromised conditions. The key question is not whether the bond is pure. The key question is whether the individual remains capable of judgment. Scarlet does. That is why she survives psychologically, not just physically. Awareness is what keeps adaptation from becoming total captivity. In dangerous systems, the mind's greatest defense is not innocence. It is clarity.